back to another Truth Be Told episode. My name is Max. I'm here with Dwight for all you audio listeners, and thanks for joining us. We're super excited to have you guys here with us. I know when we were finishing up the last one, Dwight was typing away, had a couple thoughts, so we're gonna come into this and see what you got.
Yeah, we were talking about that clay and
Yes.
in the last one and what was inside of that clay
Yeah.
and in the scriptures there's a number of places that God talks about that he's the artisan, he's the sculptor,
Yeah.
and we are simply that that ball of clay.
Yeah.
And if you've ever watched, and remember in the book of Jeremiah that, let me stop and say something so random. But there are some things that God's priority of time is so different than ours. You know, I think of the Old Testament prophets and these incredible men that are so disciplined to be obedient to God, even when it looks foolish.
Yep.
You know, for at one period of time, I think it was Jeremiah that God told him, "I want you to go and lay on your side for so many days." And we would look at that and say, "God, what a waste of time." You know, and I'm not accomplishing anything else, and I'm going to atrophy here, laying here like this, and just such random things, and that God requires of them, and they're fully obedient in that. And so God tells Jeremiah, "I want you to go down to the potter's house,
Yeah.
and I just want you to watch." And we would think, you know, in our modern world where we think of time and all of these things, well, God, I'm not really accomplishing this, or this. And
Yeah. Not
so,
getting the job
so
done.
God's economy of time is so different than ours. And I think we all struggle with that.
Yeah.
When God puts us on hold or God sets us aside, where God does something in our life and it just looks like it's this incredible waste of our time.
Yeah, well, and I think like it feels like, oh, I need to get from here to there. I got this plan, and I want it to happen this way. We can plan it, think of it that way. God's ways are not our ways, and I think it's easy for us to just get locked into our own thinking, but that also limits what God can do in our life.
Yeah, and so that part of we're that ball of clay, and I've watched a few times, and I've watched shows or watched people that are working with the clay, and they throw it on the potter's wheel,
Yeah.
and they put this clay on there, and in their mind, in the potter's mind, as he begins to spin the wheel,
Yeah.
and he begins to form that and shape that, it comes up and it comes up, and he's got in his mind, he's got this idea of what that's going to become. But as he's doing it, he doesn't know that in the very center of that, there's this rock. There's this thing that mars it. There's a weakness. There's an imperfection in that. You know, as he begins that, of course, God knows. God knows our weaknesses, and he knows our rocks, and he knows our imperfections, and so on. But as he's molding that, you watch the potter, and it comes up, and it just looks like it's going to become, and then this imperfection shows up.
Yeah.
What does he do? Abby, you can chime in on this if you'd like, because you're more artistic than Max and I.
Does he? Does he? I haven't watched. I haven't. It's been a long time. Like I haven't watched what Potter does when he's doing that. But does he? I'm gonna guess he doesn't stop it, but take it out somehow, or does he? I guess if it's a rock, he'd have to get rid of it.
So Abby, any thoughts on what the potter does when he finds that imperfection in that?
I don't think he can use it. I think usually they have to crush the clay and then
Reset it.
re-wedge it, and then they have to take that, or they first would take out the imperfection and then have to re-wedge it, and then they have to restart from the beginning.
Yeah, in the scriptures it says that God does it is up to God. God can make that into a vessel of honor or dishonor, and that it's His choice in order to do that. And as it's coming up, it doesn't become that. He can push it back down again if it's not too far along. If it's not too dry, again, we're not potters and we're not part of all of that. And that's why that God sent Jeremiah, because I don't think Jeremiah knew everything about everything. And so He sends him. He says, I want you to go there. I want you to spend some days just watching him and watching the potter. And then He goes, I'm the potter. You're the clay. And how often that we rebel against that, because we have these plans, we have these ideas, we have of what we're going to become and who we're going to be, and what that's going to look like. And so as God is doing this work, He's the potter, we're the clay, we're in the potter's house, and as God is doing this work, He finds, no, that's wrong. He doesn't find it. He knows it's there, but it shows up. And we see it. And God begins, and so now He's going to work with that imperfection. He's going to take that imperfection out, or He's going to mold that. And if we rebel against that, if we become angry at God, we become disgruntled with God, and we say, God, I'm not going to allow you to do this, then we go from this plan that God has, and what has been revealed. So we go from this to this, and until we're willing to surrender and allow Him to be the potter, and we are the clay. And He's molding us, and He molds us through our imperfections. He molds us through our circumstances. He molds us through our difficulties, all of the things that we want to rebel against. And if you look at your life, you can see that the most difficult times that you've gone through with all of these are the places where God now has your attention. And God is beginning to shape and to mold you into the image or into the instrument that He desires for you to be.
Yeah. I think there's a quote from an artist that I listen to, and I'm sure it's coming from the scriptures, but it's not the oh shoot, how does it go? It's the destination, not the finish, that molds you.
Yeah.
Basically. Or sorry, it's the journey that molds you, not the destination.
Yeah.
It's basically along the journey through all of that, that's where He's shaping us, not just getting us to the destination, because we generally don't learn a lot when it's the good times, if you will. But through those imperfections and through all of those things, I think through that journey of letting Him do that, we're going to get His result. In the midst of that.
Sorry, I had an idea. I don't know how well that they can hear me, though. I'll speak up. So there's a Japanese art form known as kintsugi. Apologies for my pronunciation. But it's the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by mending the cracks with lacquer mixed with gold, silver, or platinum. Instead of hiding the damage, kintsugi emphasizes the breaks, making them part of the object's history and beauty. It's a metaphor for embracing imperfections and finding strength and resilience.
That's exactly what God does with us, and that's what He's doing, but we don't see that. I wrote, or I typed in a while ago, and God has the right to mold us into the vessel of his choosing.
Mhm.
And you know, and I, very honest with you, I struggle with that. You know, allowing God, because what God desires may be lower than what I want. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way at all.
Mhm.
You know, I may have this idea of, you know, when I was young, of pastoring a large church and doing how that will look.
Yeah.
And yet God began to work on all of the broken pieces of me.
Yeah.
And he used the circumstances and those imperfections that were with. He used
Mhm.
churches and he used people and he used circumstances to show all of that brokenness that was in me that I didn't recognize, and I didn't want to recognize it.
Yeah.
And I did not want to be lowered in the value of that.
Right.
And yet, as that
Mhm.
form of Japanese artistry, right?
Yeah.
Now, at the age that I'm at, when I look back, those were the things.
Mhm.
Those were the things that shaped and molded and made me into the vessel of his choosing, his desire.
Yeah. And I just love that's such a powerful real life example of the way that God works.
Yeah.
And instead of just throwing something out, he takes something
Yeah.
and embraces those imperfections, and that's how he molds us
Yeah.
into something more beautiful than it ever could have been before that. With all of those things, it's not a matter of being perfect. It's a matter of allowing him to do the work, and then allowing him to give the result instead of us just trying to
Yeah. All the way
force our
through.
result.
Yeah. All the way through the Older Testament, right?
Mm-hmm.
Newer Testament, we see it as well. But the Older Testament, being that it's 39 books, and all of the stories that are there of people, right? You know, you go from creation right until the coming of Christ and all of that.
Mm.
And you look at all of these imperfect people.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we've got them elevated, we got them lifted up. We think about Abraham, right?
Yeah.
And we go, wow, you know, and here's a guy that was a friend of God, and here's a guy that had this relationship with God. But we forget about all of his imperfections.
Yeah,
And
well,
God,
it's easy to just be like, oh, he didn't have any of the, or it's like, but then sometimes it feels like, oh, how could I ever become anything like that?
yeah,
But they're all there. They're all in all of us.
yeah, and the beauty of God is that he's not afraid.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to show the imperfections in his people.
Yeah.
You know, we you know, all of the, you know, we look at the Old Testament heroes and the heroes of faith and so on,
Mhm.
but God always shows us their imperfections. And you know, whether that's Joseph, whether that's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whether that's Joseph, whether that's David, whether that's Solomon, and God shows us their imperfections because we have those.
Yeah. Doesn't try
And
to hide it or cover it up.
he does, yeah, absolutely. And yet, as that talks about, when you start putting that gold and so on, you
Mhm.
look at those frailties of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You look at the frailties of Joseph and David and all of these ones, and you see God at work in the midst of those, and he receives, you know, as he does with us, he wants to receive glory
Mhm.
for it, because you know, they were men, you know, like Elijah in the Old Testament. He was man subject to like passions such as we are.
Yeah.
He had these struggles, you know, and Elijah went through an incredible time of deep, deep depression.
Mhm.
And you know, oftentimes we think, you know what, if I have depression, I'm weak,
Mhm.
and you know, I'm worthless or of lower value. And you see Elijah, you know, he's on the run, and for 40 days he's on the run, and simply because someone uh, uttered a threat for him, and yet he saw God at work. And I think of, you know, all through history,
Yeah.
many people will talk about Spurgeon. and being the greatest of preachers, call him a prince of preachers in England, and had an incredible ministry, large gathering of folks that came, and yet he was subject to such extreme depressions, right? And God used that in the midst of that, and God uses our weaknesses and brings us to that place, and it's like that, that beautiful pottery that's made, right? And what looks like it's an imperfection, and what looks like it causes that vessel to be worthless. Really, is some of the things that gives it its value, and and in our lives, right? And I think back, and in my life, and struggling with depression, struggling with a sense of no value, no worth, and so on, and yet God does all of these things. And now that I look back, and the other part is, when he uses those, you can see those in others. God uses our brokenness with others.
I was gonna say, because generally, if we don't go through things or go through broken times, which we all do, then we start to empathize with others at a deeper level, in a way that I think Christ is, or Jesus is, God is showing us through that. And then that allows us to be able to love and connect with those that need it.
Yeah, we sympathize with them. We love, we encourage them, we lift them up, we feel for them, right? And in the midst of all of that,
and if we don't go through that or have those scars, then it's hard to understand.
Yeah, there's two thoughts I want to share just before we close, and one is that we're simply this earthen vessel, this pottery that God is at work, and he knows the design, and he knows. But the other part is, Paul wrote, and he says, we have this treasure in an earthen vessel, and we have the Holy Spirit of God that helps us make sense. It doesn't make sense all at once. It doesn't make sense necessarily at the time, but he's the one that helps us make sense of that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's open to everybody. I think, it's important for everybody to know that they can come to Christ. He's going to meet you where you're at, and do something beautiful with the things that we think nobody can do anything with. And we're just worthless because of it.
That's truth be told.
And truth be told. Thanks for joining us on this episode, and we will see you in the next one.